I used to think the Chesapeake Bay was peaceful. That probably sounds stupid if you grew up around it, because anyone from Maryland knows the bay has two faces. During the day, it's postcard beautiful. Blue water, white boats, crab pots, gulls screaming over docks, old men drinking coffee outside bait shops before sunrise. But at night, it becomes something else. The water turns black. The marsh grass whispers even when there's no wind. Lights from distant houses stretch across the surface like they're trying to reach you. And every little sound carries too far. I grew up in a small waterfront town south of Annapolis, the kind of place tourists drove through on their way to somewhere more interesting. My dad worked construction. My mom worked at a dentist's office. We weren't rich, but I had something most kids would have killed for. My best friend Caleb had a boat. It wasn't fancy. It was an old center console his uncle had rebuilt twice and probably should have scrapped once. The seats were cracked, the radio only worked when it felt like it, and the engine had a cough that made every trip feel like a gamble. But to us, it was freedom. By the time we were 23, Caleb and I knew every creek, channel, and weird little shoreline within an hour of our marina. We fished, we drank, we explored abandoned docks and tiny spits of land nobody cared about. That's how we found Dead Horse Point. That wasn't its real name. I don't even know if it had one. It was a narrow strip of marsh and woods sticking out into the bay, somewhere past Deal and before the water opened wider. From far away it looked like nothing. Just reeds, black mud, and a line of scrubby trees bent sideways by years of storms. We named it Dead Horse Point because the first time we stepped onto it, we found a horse skull half sunk in the mud. At least we thought it was a horse. Neither of us knew bones well enough to be sure. Most people would have left after finding that. We were young and stupid, so we decided it was the coolest place we had ever seen. Dead Horse Point became our secret spot. There was a little clearing hidden behind the reeds where the ground was dry enough to sit. Someone had used it before us, probably fishermen or duck hunters, because there was an old fire ring made from oyster shells and bricks. A few beer cans were rusted into the dirt. A crab pot buoy hung from a tree branch, faded orange and split open on one side. The place had a strange feeling, but not in an obvious way. Nothing jumped out at you. Nothing screamed danger. It just felt abandoned in a way that didn't make sense. There were no birds in the trees, no frogs in the muddy pools, no insects whining in the brush. Even in July, when mosquitoes should have been eating us alive, Dead Horse Point stayed quiet. Caleb noticed it first. "Place feels paused," he said once. I asked what he meant. He shrugged. "Like somebody hit mute." We joked about it after that. We called it the muted place. We told friends it was cursed. We made up stories about a drowned farmer, a Civil War deserter, a waterman who murdered his crew and buried them under the reeds. None of it was real. At least, I don't think it was. The last time I went there was the weekend before Labor Day. There were 6 of us: me, Caleb, Caleb's girlfriend Marissa, my coworker Tyler, his sister June, and a girl named Erin who I had been talking to for a few weeks. Erin was the reason I agreed to stay overnight. Caleb had been pushing the idea all summer. He wanted to camp at Dead Horse Point, build a fire, drink, maybe fish at sunrise. I kept saying no because the place was barely land. One bad tide and half of it turned to soup. Then Erin said it sounded fun. So obviously I changed my mind. We left the marina around 3 in the afternoon with coolers, sleeping bags, 2 tents, and a Bluetooth speaker Caleb promised not to play too loud. The weather was perfect, hot but not miserable. The water was calm enough that even Marissa, who got nervous on boats, relaxed after a few minutes. When we reached Dead Horse Point, the tide was low. That mattered. At low tide, there was a muddy bank where you could step off without sinking past your ankles. At high tide, that bank disappeared completely. Caleb anchored the boat, and we carried everything in 2 trips. Erin laughed when her shoes got stuck in the mud, and I remember thinking the whole thing felt like a movie version of being young. We set up camp in the clearing. For a while, it was perfect. We cooked sausages over the fire. Tyler tried to catch crabs with chicken necks tied to string and failed miserably. June found the old horse skull and screamed until Caleb picked it up and chased her with it. Aaron and I walked down to the water and talked while the sun went to orange behind the trees. She asked if I believed the place was actually haunted. I said no. She asked why I kept looking over my shoulder then. I laughed, but I didn't have a good answer. Because I had been looking over my shoulder. All afternoon I kept feeling like something was standing just out of sight in the reeds. Not watching exactly. Waiting. I didn't say that. I told her I was just making sure Caleb didn't do anything dumb with the fire. Night came fast. That's something people forget about being near the water. One minute there's still light in the sky, and the next everything beyond the fire is gone. The speaker died around 10. Caleb blamed the battery, but I was relieved. Without music, the clearing became too quiet. The only sounds were the fire, the water, and Tyler occasionally opening another beer. Then Marissa asked, "Where's the boat light?" We all turned. Through the trees, we should have been able to see Caleb's anchor light glowing faintly over the water. We couldn't. Caleb stood up, probably blocked by the reeds. But I could hear the doubt in his voice. He grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the shoreline. I followed because I didn't want him going alone, and Aaron followed me. The path from the clearing to the water was only about 30 yards. We had walked it 10 times already. That night it felt longer. The reeds on both sides were taller than us. The mud sucked at our shoes. The flashlight beam jumped across pale stalks and black water puddles. When we reached the bank, the boat was still there, but the anchor light was off. Caleb cursed under his breath. "Battery?" I asked. "No, separate system." He flashed the light over the boat. That's when Aaron grabbed my arm. There was someone sitting in it. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. The figure was in the back of the boat, hunched low near the motor. It looked like a person wearing a dark raincoat, head bowed, hands resting on their knees. Caleb shouted, "Hey!" The figure didn't move. He shouted again, louder, still nothing. Then the boat shifted slightly with the water, and the flashlight beam changed angle. The person was gone. Not moved. Gone. There was nowhere for them to go. The boat was 20 feet from shore, surrounded by open water. Nobody splashed. Nobody climbed over the side. Nobody ducked into a cabin because there was no cabin. 1 second, someone was sitting there. The next, the seat was empty. Aaron whispered, "I saw that." I said, "Me too." Caleb didn't say anything. He just kept the light on the boat for a long time. When we got back to the clearing, everyone could tell something had happened. Marissa immediately asked what was wrong. Caleb lied and said the light had shorted out. Aaron looked at me like she wanted me to correct him. I didn't. Maybe that was cowardly, but I didn't want to start panic over something I couldn't explain. I told myself it had been a shadow, a tarp, a trick of the light. Then June said, "Why is there mud on my sleeping bag?" Nobody laughed. Her sleeping bag was inside one of the tents. The tent had been zipped closed. We all gathered around while she pointed. Across the blue fabric were 3 muddy handprints. Not raccoon tracks, not smears. Handprints. Long fingers. Wide palms. Too large to be June's. Too large to be Aaron's or Marissa's. Tyler accused Caleb of messing around. Caleb got angry instantly, which made it obvious he wasn't. Then we heard something moving in the reeds. Not near the water. Behind us. The fire popped loudly and everyone froze. The sound came again. A slow, dragging noise. Like someone pulling a wet sack through mud. Caleb picked up the flashlight and aimed it toward the reeds behind the clearing. At first there was nothing. Then something reflected the light. 2 eyes. They were low to the ground, maybe waist height and too far apart. Marissa started crying. The eyes blinked. Then rose. Whatever was out there stood up. The reeds moved around it, but we couldn't see a body. Just those two pale reflections hovering in the darkness. Tyler, drunk enough to be brave, yelled, "Get out of here!" The eyes turned toward him. Then a voice from the reeds said, "Which one?" It sounded like an old woman. Nobody moved. The voice said again, "Which one are you leaving?" June screamed. That broke everything. Caleb yelled for everyone to grab their stuff. Nobody grabbed anything useful. We abandoned the tents, the cooler, the sleeping bags, everything except phones and keys. We ran for the shoreline. The reeds whipped against us. Mud sucked at our feet. Behind us, something moved parallel to the path, keeping pace. I could hear it breathing, not panting. Breathing slowly like it wasn't in a hurry. When we reached the water, the boat was farther out than it should have been. The anchor line had been cut. Caleb stood at the bank staring in disbelief while the boat drifted away in the dark bay. Then Aaron pointed at the mud. Something had written in it. 6 names. Caleb. Marissa. Tyler. June. Aaron. Mine. Under the names, written deep with a finger or stick, were 3 words. Choose before tide. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The only thing moving was our boat. It drifted farther into the Chesapeake, rocking gently as if someone had untied it only moments earlier. Caleb splashed into the water without thinking. "Grab the rope!" I yelled. He reached the floating anchor line just before the current carried it too far. Mud sucked at his boots while Tyler and I waded in to help drag the boat back. By the time we pulled it close enough to climb aboard, all 3 of us were covered in black marsh sludge. Nobody mentioned the writing anymore. Maybe because nobody wanted to admit we'd all seen it. Maybe because every single one of us had. Caleb started the engine. Nothing. He tried again. The starter groaned once before falling silent. No. He tried a 3rd time. Dead. Tyler looked over the side. The fuel line. Caleb followed his gaze. Someone had sliced it clean through. Not ripped. Not broken. Cut. A thin stream of gasoline floated across the surface like rainbow-colored veins before disappearing into the dark water. Marissa started crying harder. "We're trapped." "No!" Caleb snapped, although he sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "There's paddles." We still had 2 emergency paddles stored under the console. The marina was almost 5 miles away. 5 miles didn't sound impossible until you remembered we were in open bay water at midnight with 6 people, no working motor, and a marsh behind us that suddenly felt alive. Then the reeds rustled again. All 6 of us turned. The flashlight swept across the shoreline. Nothing. Then, movement. Not 1 person. 3. They weren't standing together. They were spread apart among the reeds, motionless. Too far away to see faces. Close enough to know they were watching. Tyler whispered, "Please tell me you guys see them." Nobody answered. Because we did. Caleb climbed fully into the boat. "Everybody in, right now." Nobody argued. We shoved the boat away from shore and started paddling. The current fought us immediately. Every few strokes, someone looked back. The 3 figures never moved. They simply stood on the shoreline watching us leave. After maybe 50 yards, Aaron quietly said, "There's 4 now." I turned. She was right. Another figure stood farther down the bank, then another, then another. They weren't appearing one by one. It was like every time we looked away and back, more people were simply there. None of them waved. None of them chased us. They just watched. I counted 9 before I forced myself to stop looking. It took nearly 2 hours to reach another marina. By then, our arms felt like they were going to fall off. The first person we found was an older dockmaster named Leonard. He looked at us for maybe 2 seconds before asking, "What happened to you?" Caleb immediately started explaining. Dead engine, cut fuel line, people on the marsh, riding in the mud. Leonard listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, the old man didn't laugh. He simply asked, You camped on Parker's Marsh? We all looked at each other. Parker's Marsh? I asked. The place you called Dead Horse Point. None of us had ever heard that name before. Leonard sighed. My grandfather warned me about that place when I was a kid. Tyler rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. Leonard ignored him. There used to be a fishing settlement out there almost 100 years ago. He leaned against a piling before continuing. Storm came through one winter. Boats disappeared. Families disappeared. People searched. They only found empty houses. No bodies. No boats. No explanations. Marissa whispered, so everyone just vanished? Leonard nodded slowly. The story changed depending on who told it. Some said they drowned. Some said smugglers killed them. My grandfather said something else. Nobody interrupted. He said the marsh keeps asking for replacements. Silence. Then Tyler laughed. Not because it was funny, because people laugh when they're uncomfortable. Leonard didn't. You ever notice how quiet that place is? Caleb nodded. No birds. No frogs. No insects. Leonard looked at him carefully. They know. We went home just before sunrise. Nobody slept. The next afternoon, Caleb insisted we report the vandalism. The county deputy listened politely. Asked where exactly we'd been. Asked if we'd been drinking. Asked if maybe another group of campers had played a prank. He wrote everything down. Nothing ever came of it. No investigation, no follow-up, no calls. As far as the police were concerned, someone had cut a fuel line. That was it. For about a week, life returned to normal. Or at least we pretended it had. Nobody brought up Parker's Marsh anymore. The group chat went quiet. Tyler joked about ghosts exactly once. Nobody responded. Then strange things started happening. Small things first. I'd wake up with muddy footprints outside my apartment door. Not every morning. Just often enough that I stopped convincing myself they belonged to neighbors. They always ended a few feet from my door. Never started anywhere. Just ended. As if whoever made them had walked out of thin air. Erin called me 8 days later. I think someone's outside. I drove to her townhouse immediately. She met me on the porch looking exhausted. What happened? She pointed toward her backyard. The grass was soaked from rain. Across the middle of the lawn. 6 muddy footprints. Only 6. Perfectly spaced. No trail leading in. No trail leading away. Just 6 prints. Standing, facing her bedroom window. She hadn't called the police. She knew how ridiculous it sounded. Honestly, so did I. But I believed her immediately, because I'd seen almost the exact same thing that morning outside my apartment. A month passed. Tyler lost his job. Not fired. The warehouse where he worked caught fire overnight. Nobody died. The building was condemned. 2 weeks later, June totaled her car after swearing she saw someone standing in the middle of Route 2 just before dawn. Police found no one. Marissa developed severe insomnia. She told Caleb she woke up every night hearing someone slowly dragging wet rope across their deck. They lived nowhere near water. Then Caleb stopped answering texts. At first, we assumed he was busy. After 3 days, I drove to his house. His truck sat in the driveway. His boat was gone. His father answered the door. You here for Caleb? Yeah. He left Tuesday. Fishing? His father frowned. He said he wanted to prove something. A knot formed in my stomach. What do you mean? He said everyone was acting crazy. He was going back to that marsh. My blood went cold. When? 3 days ago. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I called everyone immediately. Nobody had heard from him. His phone went straight to voicemail. The Coast Guard started searching that afternoon. They found his boat the following morning, floating, engine running perfectly, fuel tank full, wallet still inside, phone on the console, keys in the ignition. There wasn't a single sign Caleb had ever come back aboard. The strangest part? The anchor had been dropped, exactly where Dead Horse Point used to be. Only, when the search teams arrived, the marsh wasn't there anymore. According to GPS, they were in the correct location. According to every chart, the peninsula should have been directly beneath them. Instead, there was only open water. No reeds, no trees, no shoreline, nothing. Just the Chesapeake Bay stretching in every direction, like the place had never existed at all. The Coast Guard searched for 2 days, then 4, then a week. Eventually, Caleb's disappearance became another missing person case, buried under newer headlines. People assumed he had fallen overboard. The current was strong. The bay was unpredictable. Accidents happened. Only 5 people knew that explanation didn't fit. Us. Caleb knew those waters better than almost anyone. He wore his life jacket when he was alone. His boat showed no signs of a struggle. His phone, wallet, sunglasses, even his coffee thermos were exactly where they should have been. It looked less like someone had disappeared and more like someone had simply stepped off the boat. Voluntarily. Months passed. The group slowly drifted apart. Tyler moved to Pennsylvania after finding another job. June refused to go near open water again. Marissa sold every photograph she had taken on boats. She couldn't even look at the bay without breaking down. Aaron and I stayed in touch, mostly because neither of us could stop thinking about that night. Neither of us ever admitted it out loud, but I think we were both waiting for something else to happen. It did, almost exactly 1 year later. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning because someone was knocking on my apartment door. Not pounding, just 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. The hallway lights were on, completely empty. I waited another minute before opening the door. Nothing. Then I looked down. The welcome mat was soaked, covered in black marsh mud. Across it were wet footprints leading to my door. 6 prints, exactly 6. No trail leading away. My stomach dropped. I slammed the door shut. 5 seconds later, knock, knock, knock. The sound hadn't come from the hallway. It came from my bedroom window. I lived on the 3rd floor. I didn't look. I wish I could tell you I was brave enough. I wasn't. I grabbed the kitchen knife, backed into the living room, and waited until sunrise with every light in the apartment turned on. When daylight finally came, I forced myself to check the window. Nothing, no footprints. No ladder, no scratches. Nothing except condensation on the glass. Except someone had drawn a single word in it with a finger. Come. The letters disappeared as the sun warmed the window. I never told anyone. Not even Erin. 3 weeks later, Erin called me crying. She said she had dreamed about Caleb. Normally, I would have blamed grief until she described the dream. He wasn't underwater. What do you mean? He was standing. Standing where? She hesitated. In the reeds. He kept telling me the tide wasn't finished. Then she said something I'll never forget. He told me not to answer if someone knows my name. Every hair on my arms stood up, because neither of us had ever told anyone about the woman calling Caleb from the shoreline. I finally did something I'd avoided for a year. I started researching Parker's Marsh, old newspapers, historical archives, maritime records, anything. For weeks I found almost nothing. Then I discovered a newspaper from 1931. Buried inside the local section was a tiny article, only 6 paragraphs long. A local fisherman claimed an entire duck hunting party disappeared near Parker's Marsh. 6 men. 1 guide. Search crews found their boats anchored perfectly. Coffee still warm, lunch untouched, no bodies. The sheriff called it a drowning accident, but one sentence caught my attention. The guide's wife told reporters that her husband had visited the marsh the previous evening. According to her, He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. They already know our names. That wasn't the oldest story. In county records from the late 1800s, there was mention of surveyors refusing to map part of the shoreline because landmarks could not be found twice. One expedition described trees appearing and disappearing between visits. Another claimed an entire peninsula shifted with the tide. No official explanation was ever recorded. Modern maps simply stopped referencing the area altogether, as if everyone quietly agreed to pretend it wasn't there. Almost 2 years passed. Nothing happened. Life slowly became normal again. I got married. Aaron moved to North Carolina. For a while, I convinced myself we'd escaped whatever happened that night. Then last October, I was cleaning boxes in my garage when I found my old tackle bag. At the bottom was a disposable camera, one we'd taken camping. I'd forgotten it existed. Curious, I had the film developed. There were 24 photos. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Tyler holding a fish. June making faces. Marissa asleep in a folding chair. Aaron smiling beside the fire. Then came the last picture. I don't know who took it, none of us remember. It was taken from somewhere inside the reeds, looking toward our campsite. All 6 of us were sitting around the fire. The angle was impossible. Whoever held the camera had been less than 20 feet away, watching us. The photo itself wasn't what scared me. It was what stood behind Caleb. At first glance, it looked like another tree. Then I zoomed in. Someone was standing directly behind him. Tall, thin, face hidden. One hand rested lightly on Caleb's shoulder. Nobody at the camp was reacting. It was as if they couldn't see the figure at all. I brought the picture to Erin. She stared at it for almost a minute before quietly asking, "Did you count us?" I frowned. There were 6. She shook her head. No. She pointed toward the fire. There are 7 people sitting there. I counted again. Once, twice, 3 times. She was right. There were 7. One person sat on the far side of the fire, head lowered, face hidden by darkness, wearing clothes none of us recognized. Nobody remembered that person being there, because they weren't. At least, they shouldn't have been. I still live in Maryland. People always ask why I sold my boat. I tell them boating just isn't fun anymore. That's easier than telling the truth. Because sometimes driving across the Bay Bridge at night, I'll glance toward the water. Just for a second. And every now and then, far out where there shouldn't be anything, I'll see a faint orange campfire. Standing beside it are several figures. They never wave. They never move. But one of them always seems slightly taller than the others. Every year, around Labor Day, there seems to be one more person standing around that fire. And every year, I wonder if Caleb is still waiting for someone to answer when they hear their name called from the reeds.